He's got dark powers the rest of us could only dream of, Peter Pettigrew shouted shrilly. How else did he get out of there? I suppose he who must not be named taught him a few tricks. Black started to laugh, a horrible, mirthless laugh that filled the whole room. Voldemort teach me tricks, he said. Pettigrew flinched at the thought that Black had brandished a whip at him. What's scared to hear your master's name, said Black. I don't blame you, Peter. His lot aren't very happy with you, are they? Don't know what you mean, Sirius, muttered Pettigrew. Breathing faster than ever, his whole face was shining with sweat now. You haven't been hiding from me for 12 years, said Black. You've been hiding from Voldemort. Old supporters. I heard things in Azkaban, Peter. They all think you're dead, or that you'd have to answer to them. I've heard them screaming all sorts of things in their sleep. Sounds like they think they double-crossed them. Voldemort went to the Potters on your information, and then Voldemort met his downfall there. And not all Voldemort supporters ended up in Azkaban, did they? No, there are still plenty of them out here, biding their time, pretending they've seen the error of their ways. If they ever got wind that you were still alive, Peter. Don't know what you're talking about, said Peter Pettigrew, more shrilly than face with his sleeve, and then looked up at Lupin. You don't believe this madness, Remus? I must admit, Peter, I have difficulty in understanding why an innocent man would want to spend 12 years as a rat, said Lupin evenly. Innocent but scared, squealed Pettigrew. If Voldemort supporters were after me, if it was because I put one of the best men in Azkaban, the spy, Sirius Black. Black's face contorted. How dare you? He growled, sounding suddenly like a bear-sized dog that he had been. I spy for Voldemort? When did I ever sneak around people who were stronger and more powerful than myself? But you, Peter, I'll never understand why didn't I see that you were a spy from the start? You've always liked big friends who'd look after you, didn't you? It used to be us, me, Remus, and James. Pettigrew wiped his face again, almost panting for breath. Me? A spy? You must be out of your mind. Never. Don't you know what I can say? You can say such a... Lily and James only made you the secret keeper because I suggested it, Black hissed, so venomously that Peter Pettigrew took a step backward. I thought it was the perfect plan to bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me, would never dream they'd use a weak, talentless thing like you. Oh, must have been the finest moment of your miserable life, telling Voldemort you could hand him the Potters. Pettigrew was muttering distractedly. Harry caught the words like far-fetched lunacy, but he couldn't help but paying more attention to the ashen color of Pettigrew's face and the way his eyes continued to dart around the window and the door. Professor Lupin, said Hermione timidly, can I say something? Certainly, Hermione, said Lupin courteously. Well, Scabbers, this man has been sleeping in Harry's dormitory for 3 years. If he is working for you-know-who, how come he never tried to hurt Harry before now? There, said Peter shrilly, pointing to Ron with his maimed hand. Thank you. You see, Remus, I have never hurt a hair on Harry's head. Why should I? I'll tell you why, said Black, because you never did anything for anyone unless you could see what it wasn't for you. Voldemort's been in hiding for 12 years. They say he's half dead. You weren't about to commit murder right under Albus Dumbledore's nose for a week of a wizard who'd lost all his power, were you? You'd want to be quite sure he was the biggest bully in the playground before you went back to him, wouldn't you? Why else would you find a wizard family to take you in? Keeping an ear for the news, weren't you, Peter? Just in case the old protector regained strength and it was safe to rejoin him. Pettigrew opened his mouth and closed it several times. He seemed to have lost the ability to talk. Mr. Black? Serious? Said Hermione. Black jumped at being addressed like this and stared at Hermione, as though being spoken to politely was something he'd long forgotten. If you don't mind me asking, how did you get out of Azkaban if you didn't use dark magic? Thank you, gasped Pettigrew, nodding frantically at her. Exactly, precisely what I was. But Lupin silenced him with a look. Black was frowning slightly at Hermione, but not as though he was annoyed with her. He seemed to be pondering the answer. I don't know how I did it, he said slowly. I think the only reason I never lost my mind is that I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't suck it out of me. But it kept me sane, and knowing who I am helped me keep my powers. So when it all came too much, I could transform in myself. I became a dog. Dementors can't see you, you know. He swallowed. They feel their way for you by sensing your emotions. They could tell about my feelings were less than human, less complex when I was a dog, but they thought, of course, that I was losing my mind like everyone else in there. So it didn't trouble them. But when I was weak, very weak, and I had no hope for driving them away from me without a wand. But then I saw Peter in that picture. I realized that he was at Hogwarts with Harry, perfectly positioned to act. If one hint reached his ears that the dark side was gathering strength again. Pettigrew was shaking his head, mouthing noiselessly, but staring at all the while at Black as though hypnotized, ready to strike at the moment. He could be sure of allies, and to deliver the last Potter to them. If he gave them Harry, who dare say he'd betrayed Lord Voldemort, he'd be welcomed back with honors. So you see, I had to do something. I was the only one who knew Peter was still alive. Harry remembered what Mr. Weasley had told Mrs. Weasley. The gods say he's been talking in his sleep. Always the same things. He's at Hogwarts. It was as if someone had lit a fire in my head, and the Dementors couldn't destroy it. It wasn't a happy feeling. It was an obsession. But it gave me strength, and it cleared my mind. So one night, when they opened my door to bring me food, I slipped past them as a dog. It was so much harder for them to sense animal emotions, and they were confused. I was thin, very thin enough to slip through bars. I swam as a dog back to the mainland. I journeyed up north and slipped into the Hogwarts grounds as a dog. I've been living in the forest ever since, except when I came to watch the Quidditch game, of course. You fly well, as your father did, Harry. He looked at me, and Harry, who did not look away. Believe me, croaked Black. Believe me, Harry. I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them. As long as last, Harry believed him. Throat too tight to speak, he nodded. No. Peter Pettigrew had fallen to his knees as though Harry had been his own death sentence. He shuffled forward on his knees, groveling on his hands in front of him as though praying. Sirius, it's me. It's Peter, your friend. You wouldn't. Black kicked out Peter Pettigrew and recoiled. That's enough filth on my robes without you touching them, said Black. Remus, Pettigrew squealed, turning to Lupin instead of writhing imploringly in front of him. You don't believe this? Wouldn't Sirius have told you? Had they changed the plan? Not if he thought I was a spy, Peter, said Lupin. I assume that's why you didn't tell me, Sirius, he said casually over Pettigrew's head. Forgive me, Remus, said Black. Not at all, Padfoot, old friend, said Lupin, who was now rolling up his sleeves. And will you in turn forgive me for believing you were the spy? Of course, said Black, and the ghost of the grin flitted across the gaunt face. He too began rolling up his sleeves. Shall we kill him together? Yes, I think so, said Lupin grimly. You wouldn't, you woo! Gasped Peter Pettigrew, and he scrambled around to Ron. Ron, haven't I been a good friend, a good pet? You won't let them kill me, Ron, will you? You're on my side, aren't you? But Ron, staring at Pettigrew with the utmost revulsion. I let you sleep in my bed, he said. Kind boy, kind master. Pettigrew crawled towards Ron. You won't let them do it. I won't. I was your rat. I was a good pet. If you made a better rat than you did a human, it's much worse to boast about, Peter, said Black harshly. Ron, growing still paler with pain, wrenched his broken leg out of Pettigrew's reach. Pettigrew turned on his knees, staggered forward, and seized the hem of Hermione's robes. Sweet girl, clever girl, you won't let them help. You will let them help me. Hermione pulled the robes out of Pettigrew's clutching hands and backed away against the wall, looking horrified. Pettigrew knelt, trembling uncontrollably, turned his hand slowly towards Harry. Harry, you look just like your father, just like him. How dare you speak to Harry? Roared Black. How dare you face him? How dare you talk about James in front of him? Harry, whispered Pettigrew, shuffling towards him, hands outstretched. Harry, James would have wanted me killed. James wouldn't have wanted me killed. James would understand, Harry. He would have shown me mercy. Both Black and Lupin strode forward, seized Pettigrew's shoulders, and threw him backwards onto the floor. He sat there twitching with terror, staring up at them. You sold Lily and James to Voldemort, said Black, who was now shaking. And so, do you deny it? Pettigrew burst into tears. It was horrible to watch. He looked like an oversized, balding baby, cowering on the floor. Sirius, what could I have done? The Dark Lord, you have no idea. He has weapons you can't imagine. I was scared, Sirius. I had never been brave like you and Remus and James. I never meant it to happen. He who must not be named forced me. Don't lie, bellowed Black. You'd been passing information to him for a year before Lily and James died. You were his spy. He was taking over everywhere, gasped Pettigrew. Well, what was there to be gained by refusing him? What was there to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard that ever existed? Said Black, with a terrible flurry in his face. Only innocent lives, Peter. You don't understand, whined Pettigrew. He would have killed me, Sirius. Then you should have died, roared Black. Died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you. Black and Lupin stood shoulder to shoulder, wands raised. You should have realized, said Lupin quietly, if Lord Voldemort didn't kill you, we would. Goodbye, Peter. Hermione covered her face with her hands, turned to the wall. No, Harry yelled. He ran forward, placing himself in front of Pettigrew, facing the wands. You can't kill him, he said breathlessly. You can't. Black and Lupin both looked staggered. Harry, this piece of vermin is the reason you have no parents, Black snarled. This cringing bit of filth would have seen you die, too, without turning a hair. You heard him. His own stinking skin meant more to him than your whole family. I know, Harry panted. We'll take him up to the castle. We'll hand him over to the Dementors. He can go to Azkaban, but don't kill him. Harry, gasped Pettigrew, who flung his arms around Harry's knees. Thank you. It's more than I deserve. Thank you. Get off me, Harry spat, throwing Peter's hands off him in disgust. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers. Just for you. No one moved or made a sound except Pettigrew, whose breath was becoming wheezers, and he clutched his chest. Black and Lupin were looking at each other. Then, one movement, they lowered their wands. You're the only person who has the right to decide, Harry, said Black. But think what he did. He can go to Azkaban, Harry repeated. If anyone deserves that place, he does. Pettigrew was still wheezing behind him. Very well, said Lupin. Stand aside, Harry. Harry hesitated. I'm going to tie him up, said Lupin. That's all, I swear. Harry stepped out of the way, Thin cord shot from Lupin's wands this time. The next moment, Pettigrew was wiggling on the floor, bound and gagged. "But if you transform Peter," growled Black, his own wand pointing at Pettigrew too, "we will kill you. You agree, Harry?" Harry looked down at the pitiful figure on the floor, nodded that Pettigrew could see him. "Right," said Lupin, suddenly businesslike. "Ron, I can mend bones nearly as well as Madame Pomfrey, so I think it's best not nearly as well, so I think it's best you just strap your leg up until we get you to the hospital wing." He hurried over to Ron, bent down, tapped Ron's leg with his wand, and muttered, "Fralula." Bandages spun around Ron's leg, strapping it tightly to a splint. Lupin held him to his feet. Ron put his weight gingerly on the leg and didn't wince. "Oh, that's better," he said. "Thanks." "What about Professor Snape?" said Hermione in a small voice, looking down at Snape's prone figure. "There's nothing seriously wrong with him," Lupin, bending over Snape, checking his pulse. "You were just a little over-enthusiastic. Still, out cold. Perhaps he will be best if we don't revive him until we're safely back at the castle. We can take him like this." He muttered, "Mobile corpus," as though invisible strings were tied to Snape's wrists and neck and knees. He pulled it onto the standing position, and still folding unpleasantly the grotesque puppet, he hung a few inches above the ground and limp, dangling for Lupin, picked up the invisibility cloak, tucked it safely into his pocket. Then, two of us should be chained to this," said Black, nudging Pettigrew with his toe, "just to make sure." "I'll do it," said Lupin. "And me," said Ron savagely, limping forward. Black conjured heavy manacles from thin air. Soon Pettigrew was upright again, his arm chained to Lupin's right arm and Ron's left arm. Ron's face was set. He seemed to have taken Scabbers' true identity to a personal insult. Crookshanks leaped lightly off the bed and led the way out of the room, his bottleish tail held jaunting high.